This is the video to accompany the Academic Integrity module. First off, we'll talk about what academic integrity is. A synonym for integrity is honesty, and students are responsible for understanding and following the academic integrity policy at the school so that they can complete their studies in an honest manner. Durham College's academic policies can be found at the website you see there, www.durhamcollege.ca/academic policies, and there you will actually find many academic policies, and they will outline your rights and responsibilities as a student. So this is what the academic integrity policy looks like, and I'm going to focus in on some definitions. First of all, academic integrity, which is at the bottom there, refers to the pursuit of scholarly activity in an open, honest, and responsible manner. And the definitions above include different instances of academic dishonesty, and I'm going to highlight a few and give you some examples so that you're clear about what constitutes academic dishonesty. The first instance would be if you copy another person's work. So that could be if someone shares a file with you and you copy all or part of the document. If you receive something from someone else and you use it as your own. That's copying someone else's work. Another one would be when you use unauthorized materials during a test or an examination. So if you have electronic devices or any sorts of cheat notes that you're using in a test, if you've not been given permission to use any documents or sheets of paper, then that's another example of academic dishonesty. Another instance would be if you collaborate without permission. So if your assignment required you to work in a group and complete the project together and you all received a group grade, that's fine. But if your assignment required you to perhaps do some work together, it could be with your lab partner, for instance, but that you were responsible for writing up your own individual report or section of the document, then if you have collaborated without permission, that's another instance of academic dishonesty. Another instance would be if you are responsible for completing the work completely on your own, and then again you collaborate without getting permission from your professor. The next instance, and it actually isn't underlined, but you'll see here, colluding or providing unauthorized assistance. So if you are falsifying something or you are working together to basically mislead someone, that could be that you fabricate some lab report results or that you are falsifying information within an assignment. Another instance would be submitting the same work in more than one course without faculty authorization. So as you're completing your work, you're responsible for ensuring that each assignment for each course for each professor is an original piece of work. Unless you receive permission from your professor, you are not to submit the same work in more than one course. And that's to allow you to learn from each experience and make sure that you are doing original work each time. And finally, and I'll actually focus on this a fair amount in the rest of the video, is plagiarizing. And plagiarizing is when you fail to acknowledge where you got your information from, and that information could be ideas, it could be data, it could be graphics. If you don't acknowledge where that information came from, that's considered plagiarism, and plagiarism is a form of academic dishonesty. So why is academic dishonesty so serious? Well, first of all, it's a form of stealing. When you don't do the work your own in an honest way, if you take information from someone else, if you copy and paste something without acknowledging where it came from, if you try to misrepresent things, if you get an unauthorized copy of an evaluation prior to a test or exam, that's stealing. And much like you have property where you have a car or you have a cell phone, for instance, you're not going to allow someone to steal that property. Well, someone's ideas or somebody else's materials, they belong to them, and you can't just take them. So academic dishonesty is a form of stealing. Another reason that it's so serious is that it can actually negatively affect the reputation of the school. So if Durham College were to turn a blind eye or not have consequences for academic dishonesty, then the school would become known as that cheating school. And then your diploma or certificate at the end of your education wouldn't be worth as much as it is. So Durham College wants to maintain academic honesty, academic integrity, so that it makes your diploma or your certificate more valuable and the reputation of the school remains intact. Academic dishonesty is also serious because it negatively affects your credibility. So if a student is being academically dishonest, if they are cheating on a test or fabricating information or sharing too much information, that can negatively impact on the student's credibility, and students don't want that, I'm sure. Students don't want to be known as cheaters or someone who's dishonest, because that obviously has a negative effect on your academic career and also ultimately potentially your professional career as well. And when you've been academically dishonest, you're not demonstrating that you understand the course material, and that's key in order to get your diploma or certificate at the end of your studies, making sure that you can properly demonstrate the skill set that's required. And if you've been academically dishonest, if you've cheated in some way, then you're not demonstrating that you properly understand the material. So because it's so serious, the college, in addition to having a policy, has a procedure, and the procedure outlines what each person's responsibility is and what you as a student are required to do and how you are required to be informed. And I won't go into too much detail here, but you'll see the procedure. One thing it starts with is something called an academic alert form, and that is a standard form that would be completed if there's a suspicion or an alleged act of academic dishonesty. And then you'll see that there are other steps that are followed to allow the student to respond to that and allow it to go to the dean and so on. So the policy is very clear on what is required, what students are required to do, and the procedure outlines the steps that are taken if students do breach the academic integrity policy. What you'll see at the back of the procedure are the steps that are taken, the penalties for breaching academic integrity policy. And you'll see the first instance, there are several possibilities as to what can happen penalty-wise if you break academic integrity policy. The first one that's mentioned there is a 0 on the assignment or the assessment, up to removal from the course, and that can be on the first instance. The second instance could be dismissal from the college for 1 academic year, or perhaps an academic performance contract, removal from the course, or removal from your program. So it gets obviously very serious. If the academic integrity issues continue, or the breaches do, then it ultimately can result in that you're removed from the college for 3 academic years. So it's something that students need to be aware of what the policy is, what their responsibilities are, and be aware of the consequences, and even more importantly, how to avoid those consequences. And that would be by following academic integrity policy and doing your work in an honest way. So let's talk about one form of academic dishonesty, and that's plagiarism. A lot of times you've heard that word before. You might not completely understand what it means, but I'm just going to clarify, and we'll talk about what it is and how it's detected, and also why students plagiarize, and then finally we'll finish off with how to avoid it so that you can complete your studies in an honest and correct way. So let's talk about what plagiarism is. Well, it is one form of academic dishonesty. It's when you don't acknowledge where someone else's words or ideas came from, and those ideas or words belong to other people, and you're usually allowed to use those words or ideas, but you must do so correctly. And that would include referencing where the information came from, and also including information within quotation marks if you've copied it exactly. And that's because someone else's words or ideas are their intellectual property. It's their property, their ideas, they belong to them. So you have to give credit to that person. There are 2 ways plagiarism can occur. One is intentionally and the other one is unintentionally. Intentional plagiarism may occur if you go online and purchase a paper or copy from another student or copy and paste something from the internet without referencing it. Unintentional may occur if you're not completely familiar with the rules for referencing, or that perhaps you forgot to reference one small thing. Regardless, whether you plagiarized intentionally or unintentionally, the responsibility is yours to ensure actually that you don't, and that you understand what it is and you know how to avoid it. You can't say that you didn't know. So it's important for you to understand what it is and understand also how to ensure you don't plagiarize. So let's talk about why it occurs. And I think if you have an awareness of why it occurs, perhaps you can see it will lead you more naturally to how to avoid it. So the first reason plagiarism may occur is that procrastination has occurred. And procrastination is when you leave something to the last minute, you've delayed, you've run out of time. And when you've run out of time and when you've got that pressure to complete it, you may take shortcuts, and those shortcuts might involve doing things you normally wouldn't do. And that might be where you, again, purchase a paper online, or copy and paste, or take information from someone else, or use someone else's lab results to write up your own report. Those kinds of shortcuts won't get you very far. That's one of the greatest reasons, or biggest reasons, why students plagiarize, is because they've left things to the last minute. Another reason plagiarism may occur is when students don't understand the material, they feel that extra sense of pressure to do well. Perhaps their grade is low and they know they need to do very well on a particular assignment, and so they put obviously more pressure on themselves, and that could be a situation where you think, well, someone else must have written it better than me. I'm going to use that information and I'm not going to write it myself. So when you don't understand the material, perhaps you feel that extra pressure, and perhaps again you might do things that you normally wouldn't do. Another reason, and this is pretty common, is that students share information that they're not supposed to. So a couple of things to understand are that when you're doing a group project, and if your professor tells you there's going to be a group grade for that project, you're expected to share your ideas, share your resources, and work together to complete the project. That's called collaboration. If you're expected to work in a group, let's say your professor says, okay, you're in groups of 4, but each student is individually to complete the assignment, that means you're not sharing. You're not completing the assignment together. Each person is doing their own work. Each student is responsible for doing his or her own part to maybe contribute to a broader assignment, or perhaps to just submit the assignment independently. If you take information from another group member to complete your own individual assignment, that's considered plagiarism. That's cheating. So you want to be clear about what the expectations are, whether or not you're supposed to be working together to complete the project and get a group grade, or whether you're supposed to be working independently to achieve an individual grade. And if you need more information, there is a document at the end of the module in the resources section called Collaboration and Cheating, and that outlines in more detail even the differences between collaboration and cheating, and some strategies for making sure you don't get yourselves into trouble when working in a group. Another reason plagiarism may occur is if you don't carefully record where your information came from. So if you are going onto websites and looking through journals and opening and closing and minimizing and maximizing, and you've got lots of different sources for your information, if you're not carefully keeping track of where that information came from, you run a greater risk of not being able to record it accurately, and then you can't reference it, which actually means you shouldn't be using it. So when you're not carefully recording your sources, then there's a greater risk of plagiarism. And finally, if you're not completely familiar with the rules for referencing, and I'm going to later on talk about APA and MLA, which are two very common referencing formats. If you're not completely familiar with those rules, you may run into trouble. And that's why it's important for you to inform yourself about how to reference correctly following the format that you're supposed to be using. And again, I will touch on that later on. So how is plagiarism detected? We know what the policy is, we know what the procedure is, we know why it's treated seriously. We know what it is and even why some students might plagiarize. How is it that it's detected? Well, one way is that your professor may notice that your voice or your particular style of writing is different within an assignment. It could be a paragraph or two that's different than the rest of the assignment, or it could be that your third assignment, for instance, is different than your first two assignments. So each person has their own voice or way of writing, and your professor may notice that within the document there's a change or a shift, or it could be from one assignment to the next. They notice that your style of writing is different. Another way, and this is an electronic way of doing it, is using plagiarism detection software, such as Turnitin.com. And Turnitin.com is a database, it's a huge database, and it uses pattern matching to compare what you've written to the documents within its database. And you can see that there are millions, in fact billions, of pages of resources. Some of them are previously submitted student papers, some of them are from journals and books and newspapers, and some of them are pages from the web. And some of those are current pages, ones that are up on the web right now, and others that have been archived and are no longer on the internet. So Turnitin.com is this database that uses pattern matching to compare your work to the documents within its database. So is Turnitin used at Durham College? Well, you'll see in your course outline, General Course Note number 7, you'll see this information. And it's just highlighting that Durham College wants to maintain academic integrity, which I mentioned before is important to maintain the integrity of the school, and that faculty members have the right to use electronic means to help detect and prevent plagiarism. Turnitin.com, the college has a license to it, and it could be that you as a student would submit your assignment using Turnitin, or that your faculty member, your professor, may use Turnitin.com. If you'd like to see more or learn more information about Turnitin, you'll see the website there, and I'd encourage you to check it out. You can see the different tools that are available and more explanation on how it works. I'll give you a brief idea now, but the Turnitin.com website has even more information. So how does it work? Well, what happens is if you submit your assignment, it could be that you submit your assignment to Turnitin electronically, or you submit it to your professor who then sends it in to Turnitin.com. Either way, one of you gets back an originality report, and that originality report indicates the percentage of matches of words and phrases and sentences from your document that match with other documents in its database. And it will give a percentage of how many matches there are. If you haven't referenced your material correctly, it will come back as plagiarized. If you haven't put quotation marks around material that you've actually quoted, it will come back as plagiarized. So the originality report gives a percentage, and it actually gives a link to the material in its database, and it allows you or your professor to quickly confirm that was a mistake, I forgot to reference that one, or wow, this is a copy, an exact copy of a previously submitted paper, or something right off of Wikipedia, or something that came right out of something on the World Wide Web. So the originality report gives information and also provides the links to where the material came from. And then it would be up to the professor to determine whether or not plagiarism has in fact occurred. And if you have questions, then you would want to speak with your professor, refer to your course outline and also the assignment instructions for more information about how Turnitin is being used within your particular course. So now that you know what plagiarism is and why it occurs and how it's detected, let's talk about how you can avoid it. One way to avoid it is to make sure you're clear about what doesn't need to be referenced. And I'm highlighting this because some people think, oh, I've got to reference everything. Now I'm really nervous. Well, there are two circumstances that don't require referencing. One is common knowledge, and that's information that we say is widely known and accepted by educated people. So an example would be there are 5 Great Lakes, for instance, or Canada was established on July 1st, 1867, or cows give milk. That kind of general information that we can say pretty well everyone knows. The other instance that doesn't require referencing is your opinion. So if you believe something, if you want to express your opinion and you want to try and persuade your reader or back up that opinion, you don't need to reference your opinion. You do, however, need to reference the support you use for that opinion. So that could be journal articles, it could be web documents, it could be statistics, and so on. Those things do get referenced, but your opinion, the way you feel about something or your belief, does not get referenced. So those two things are the circumstances when you don't need to reference. When must you reference? You'll see the 5 circumstances below. And I'll just clarify that the referencing required at college is within the document and also at the end of your document, unless your professor tells you otherwise. So what you'll see here are 5 situations that you would reference in text, it's called, right within your document, and then also at the end of your document. So the first example is when you direct quote. If you copy information word for word, even as small as a sentence, then you need to use quotation marks around that material, and then you need to reference where that material came from. So direct quotations require quotation marks, and then the reference would be immediately beside that information. That's called an in-text citation, and then it would also be at the end of your document on your references page. Another instance that requires referencing so that you don't get accused of plagiarism is when you paraphrase information. And paraphrasing occurs when you take someone else's idea and you put it into your own words. So when you paraphrase, you're oftentimes keeping the length of the material the same, it's just you're rewording it, restructuring it. That's still not your idea, so you must still acknowledge where that information came from. Another instance is when you summarize. So when you summarize information, you take a larger text, maybe a couple of paragraphs, maybe a couple of pages, and you just include the main idea or main ideas. That information, again, is not your idea. Even though you've rewritten the main idea in your own words, it doesn't belong to you, so you have to acknowledge where that information came from. Also, statistics. If you've taken statistics from census data or from a textbook relating to chemistry, for instance, you have to acknowledge where those statistics came from. They must be referenced as well. And graphics or images. And these would be photos or charts, things that you found elsewhere. You have to acknowledge the source of that information. So if you remember those 5 points, those are the 5 times when you must provide references. That will really go a long way to helping you avoid plagiarism. So this is some information about how you reference in your document. And it doesn't matter whether you paraphrase or summarize or quote, you have to clearly provide a signal to your reader that you're using someone else's words or ideas. And one way to do it is to provide the author's name in your sentence, like in the first example, Norris. Then in the case of APA, which I'll talk about more afterwards, you would include the year. So Norris, 2011, concluded that, so on and so on. There's no quotation marks there because in that instance I was going to put it into my own words. At the end of that piece of information, I've included a page number if I have one. So that's called an in-text citation. The next example is an MLA example, and in MLA you don't need the year. So where APA, the one above, includes the year, the MLA example does not. Here we've got a definition. Ecology is defined as, and so on. That MLA example, in this case it was a quotation, and the author was Wilson, and it appeared on page 46. So I'm using verbs to sort of highlight my information. Concluded, defined. The next example is reported. I could use summarized, explained, noted, contradicted. I can use different verbs to sort of highlight the information and to lead into my information, and also to sort of provide a nice frame for my in-text citations, the way I've referenced the material. The final example is General Motors of Canada, 2013, reported that car sales were up. So in that case, that's an APA example, and I know that because the year is following the author. In that case, the author is a corporate author, General Motors of Canada, still the author, so you still need to signal that and include the year and then provide the information. So the in-text citations provide a signal to your reader that this is where my information came from, and then at the end of your document you're going to provide the details about those particular sources, about the Norris, the Wilson, and the General Motors source. So I'm going to highlight now two different referencing styles that are typically used at the college, APA and MLA. First I'll talk about APA. And APA stands for American Psychological Association. It's used in the sciences and the health sciences and the applied sciences. So in those fields, it's really important that the information is up to date. And in APA, you always need to include the year within your text. So APA uses what's called a references page. Sometimes you might know it as a bibliography, but in APA we call it references. That goes at the end of your document, and that includes all the details for your sources. It includes the authors and the years and the name of the publication and maybe the website or the title of the book and so on. As well, you have these in-text citations, just like the examples I showed you previously, where you're signaling where you got your information from. So the in-text citations correspond with the details on the references page. It's not that there's one or the other, they both have to be there, in-text citations and references. If you have questions about APA, I would encourage you to look at the APA module in DC Connect SALS. There is a video there that explains more detail. As well, I would pick up the APA guide from the Durham College Library. You can get it online or you can get it at the reference desk. Another citation style that's commonly used is MLA, and MLA stands for Modern Language Association, and MLA is typically used in business, in language courses, like communications courses, as well as history. And MLA has two parts as well, what's called the works cited, which is like your bibliography, but in MLA it's called works cited, and it has in-text citations. And the in-text citations in MLA only need to include the author and the page. And the in-text citations, just like in APA, the in-text citations correspond to the works cited page. Again, if you have questions, you can consult the MLA guide, which is available from the Durham College Library. So now that you've learned what plagiarism is, more about academic dishonesty as well, how can you avoid, in this instance, plagiarism? Well, one way is to use something called a research notes form. And this example is one that is fillable, which means you can put in your information, and you'll find it actually at the end of this module in the resources section. It allows you to type in your information, save it or print it, and use it to keep track of your research. So the way it works is you put all your source information here, and it says here the author, the date, the URL, and so on. You put all that information here, and you use one of these forms per source. The next thing you do is, let's say you're using a textbook, you would write down the page number. So let's say you're on page 72, and over here you take your notes, and this is where either you use quotation marks because you've copied the information exactly, or you take point form notes and just write down some point form information that later you're going to turn into your own sentences. Over here, you indicate whether it's a quotation or a paraphrase or a summary and so on, and then you write down where you think you might want to use this information. So your plan for the information. Is it going to be used in a PowerPoint? Is it going to be used in the second paragraph of your essay? Is it going to be used in your recommendations for your report? So this is where you sort of write down your plan, and then you also might want to write down any thoughts. So it could be that you say, you know, this is really good up-to-date information because maybe it's from 2012, or you may say, try to find another source that is more up-to-date. So the source information, that's where you got the information from, the page number, if there is one, and if there isn't, you can always use paragraph numbers. Then you have your notes, either quoted or in point form, and then you have your plan, which is where you think you might want to use your information. Some other ways to avoid plagiarism are to make sure that you're clear about how to summarize and paraphrase and introduce quotations. So summarizing, as I said, is when you take a larger piece of text and condense it and put it into your own words. Paraphrasing is taking a piece of text and rewording it. It's usually about the same length, sometimes even a bit longer, and in that case what you're doing is rewording it, but in both cases you're referencing it, right? You're providing the information as to where it came from. And you also want to learn how to introduce quotations correctly. So using those signal words I was talking about before, like reported, concluded, defined, and so on. If you want more information about summarizing, paraphrasing, and introducing quotations, please look at the documents in the module at the end in the resources section, and you'll see one document for each of those skills. Another way to avoid plagiarism is to make sure you understand the difference between helping someone and sharing too much. So if a student says to you, for instance, "I don't know how to do that. I don't understand the assignment. Can you please let me see what you wrote?" I would say no. You're sharing too much. But what you could do is talk through it with the student, You could maybe demonstrate, you could provide them with a short example, but not sharing the information, not giving them your file or your document. It can get you both into trouble because the student who has shared the information may be doing so to try and be helpful, but the professor often doesn't know who was the one who shared it and who was the one who received it. And in fact, the student who shared it can get into just as much trouble as the student who used it. So you want to make sure that you are not sharing too much and that you are clear about what your responsibilities are. Again, I would recommend you refer to the collaboration and cheating document, which was within the resources at the end of the module. So now I think it would be a good idea to review some top tips for avoiding plagiarism. The first tip is to learn what plagiarism is. Make sure that you understand what plagiarism is, what your responsibilities are as a student within the academic integrity policy, understanding what academic dishonesty is, and understanding what the consequences are. If you understand all of those components, that will give you a really good leg up on avoiding plagiarism to start. Also, when you understand the assignment criteria, it makes it clearer to you what your the expectations are, and then you're going to be in a better position to follow those guidelines. So if you're not sure, consult the rubric, the assignment guidelines, and/or speak with your professor to clarify exactly what's being asked of you. Another key way to avoid plagiarism and other forms of academic dishonesty is to avoid procrastinating. So try not to leave things to the last minute. What ends up happening, as has been discussed, is that shortcuts crop up. Students will try to get things done in a rushed way. When you're rushing, when you're trying to take shortcuts, copying, pasting, getting information from other people, even purchasing papers online, using previously submitted work, and so on, when you run out of time, there's a greater risk that you're going to try and take those shortcuts, and therefore a greater risk that you're going to plagiarize. Another way to avoid plagiarism is to ensure you're using credible sources. Make sure you're consulting good quality academic college-level materials. So those might be books, articles from databases, websites, and other documents that are considered credible. While you're consulting those credible sources, you want to make sure that you're taking research notes. You want to make sure that you're accurately recording where your information is coming from, the website, the page numbers you referred to, the notes that you took, and indications as to whether or not you've quoted or paraphrased or summarized, or whether you've included statistics. Make sure you are taking accurate notes and accurately recording where your information is coming from so that you can reference both within the text in your document as well as at the end of your document. Another part of that is knowing exactly what needs to be referenced. So there are 5 times when referencing is required. When you quote, and again you're going to use quotation marks, so that's when you're copying word for word. When you paraphrase, which is when you take other people's ideas or words and put them into your own words while retaining the original meaning. Again, that's not your idea, so you have to reference where it came from. Summarizing, When you condense information, you take a large piece of text and reduce it into its main idea, as well as statistics and graphics. All of those circumstances require referencing, so it's important that you keep track of that information, as in the research notes, and that you accurately record where you got your information from for those 5 situations so that you can include them in your report or paper or presentation. Also, depending on which discipline you're in, APA, you want to get familiar with APA or MLA. And there are the 2 components you'll recall, the in-text citations as well as the references page for APA or the works cited page for MLA. If you're not sure how to reference things correctly, make sure you go and pick up a copy of the library guide for either APA or MLA and follow those rules and guidelines. Another way to avoid plagiarism is to make sure that you're clearly signaling where your information is coming from. So choosing appropriate verbs and appropriate ways to signal a quotation, a paraphrase, or a summary. According to, that's one option. Another option is to mention the author's name and then use a verb. Concluded, reported, defined, suggested, and so on. Another really key way to avoid plagiarism is to make sure you allow time to review your work. Much of this actually relates to time. Allowing time to get started and to complete your work, and then at the end allowing time to review it so that you're doing a double or perhaps a triple check on your referencing, making sure that your in-text citations correspond with your references page or your works cited page. Make sure you've been consistent. Make sure that you've put quotation marks around the material that you've quoted. Allow time to review your work for the referencing and also for, as a side note, the grammar, the spelling, the punctuation, the formatting, and so on. You want your work to be a good representation of you. Your name is on your document and you want to be proud of that document. So you need to allow time to review it to give yourself the best possible opportunity to succeed. And finally, you want to seek out academic support if you need it. So your professor is available, there's the library, there's SALs, there's lots of help available if you ask for it. And you don't want to wait to the last minute to come asking for that help, because likely that help won't be available at the last minute. So if you've planned out your time and you've sought academic support, hopefully that will help you understand the requirements, it will help you meet those requirements, and help you be successful in your course, in that assignment, and ultimately in your course, and ultimately in your program for that matter. So again, where you can go for help, you can refer to your assignment guidelines, make sure you're clear about what's being asked, speak with your professor, again not at the last minute, being proactive and asking for help early on. Accessing some of the resources in DC Connect SALs. We've got lots at the end of this module. As well, there are other resources that can assist you with things like time management, with study strategies, and so on, so that you can complete your studies in an honest manner. If you need more specialized assistance, we have a writing specialist, and we also have an ESL specialist for those students who have English as their second or additional language. Finally, academic integrity is your responsibility. I encourage you to ask questions, get clarification, and make sure you're clear about your responsibilities. Ensure that you understand the academic integrity policy and other academic policies. Look at your handbook, consult the academic policies on the website, speak with your professor, speak with people at SALs. Make sure you understand what you're expected to do and how you can be successful in your studies. That's what we want for you. We want for you to be successful in your studies, and it's up to you to take your responsibility as a student seriously. Once you feel that you have a good understanding of the material from this video, I would encourage you to take the post-assessment quiz. That will allow you to demonstrate your understanding, check out different situations and scenarios and definitions, and make sure that you're clear about academic integrity and how it applies to you as a student. I wish you success in your studies, and I hope you found this information helpful.